Hello and welcome everybody to episode 20 of DigiTales. I'm your host Faizan Syed, and today I have a dear friend of mine who's coming in from Dubai and is going to talk to us about building a business, specifically a digital agency, and then his next business was in the energy space. His name is Ruchir Punjabi. How are you, Ruchir?
I'm very good, Faizan. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time and joining us on DigiTales. So we've been wanting to get someone in from the digital space, who can share sort of a neutral view on what the space looks like globally. And you are someone who built an agency by the name of Langur, and then you sold that agency to Havas, which is a big advertising group. Talk to me about that journey. First of all, why did you call it Langur? What does that even mean?
Um, when I started the agency, it was actually in Sydney, Australia in 2009. And at the time, I had a Norwegian housemate. The only Hindi word he knew was langur. And, uh, and initially I laughed it off. I said, that just sounds crazy. But I really liked the idea of being crazy to change the world. And that gave me an India connection at the time because I didn't have an India agency at that
Right.
moment. So that's how it got called Langur. And yeah, I think it served us well.
So Langur is like it's like an animal, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's basically a monkey.
It's a monkey.
Monkey, yeah,
So
and in colloquial, I don't know if you do this in Pakistan, but in India, colloquially, if you call someone langur, you're calling them crazy, basically.
so basically, you had a Norwegian friend in Australia, and you called it Langur based on that. That's like completely bizarre. But you started it out of Sydney, right? And you were
That's right.
serving
That's right.
clients in Sydney.
That's right. So I went to Australia to study. I ended up when I was finishing university, I sort of had a choice to start an agency versus I did a couple of job interviews, to be honest, and I had two projects that I won in a matter of literally within a matter of about 36 hours. I won two jobs and I had one job offer. And I decided,
Wow.
why not give this a proper shot and see where that lands. I'd
Hmm.
been making websites since I was 15, so I was
Okay.
already freelancing or doing digital work anyway, and this was sort of the organic projects that I was getting. So that led me to
So
deciding to
you
start
already
this.
had some exposure in this space. You'd been doing the websites for a while, and you said, you know what? Why not go ahead and do this full time, right?
Yeah, I also come from Gujarat in India, although I'm a Punjabi, and Gujaratis in India are known to be traders.
Right.
Running businesses is in their blood. So in some ways, a lot of people ask me, why not go work for a while, build a safety net? It's not
Yeah.
that I didn't have a calculated plan. It's just because around me, growing up, I always see people doing business. To me, I
Right.
didn't even think that that was not a choice. I just said, why not? Let's give it a shot. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Right. So you gave it a shot, and it's something you were comfortable with and something you knew, but you were in a city that you had just gone for your education to, right? You'd spent what,
Yeah,
4 years in that city?
that's correct at the time, exactly.
And so how do you go and set up a business in a city that you've only been in for 4 years, surrounded by people who are not native to you? How did you go ahead and sort of get past that barrier?
I think so. One of the things I was very active in was student politics on campus. And because of my involvement in student politics, it resulted in a fair few people in the wider community knowing about me as a tech guy who can help with some of their tech stuff. So one of the two projects that I got, actually both the projects came through my sort of political activity there on campus. One of
Okay.
them was for a minister in the state, and one of them was for a sustainability arm of a large corporate, which was run by people who were active in the political movement. So so
Okay.
so that resulted in me generating business, which was a complete coincidence. I mean, I was passionate about the issues I was involved with, so it was never a design, but it was rather a byproduct of my involvement there that resulted in me getting work. But I mean, it is a good question. How do you start a business and I didn't have new business immediately.
Right.
So one of the things, a rule I had at the time was to try and meet two or three new people every week, so that if that leads to something, that leads to something. The other piece is I did this straight out of university, so I didn't really have work or organization building experience. I didn't have employment experience specifically. So one of the things as a 22-year-old at the time was going to people who'd done this before and asking them how did they do it, what
Right.
was what were their issues, what did they do well. And every now and then someone would go, hey, this is an interesting kid, he's clearly motivated, and because he's young he'll probably do my job for cheap, let me give him some.
Right.
So
Okay.
that would often build business. It probably took me 2 to 3 years to get to a place where we had meaningful revenue. When we crossed, I think about 3.5 years, we crossed $1 million at that time.
Okay.
Um, but that is what got to it. It was just constantly going out, meeting people, getting their advice, uh, being genuinely curious, and that would often lead to new opportunities.
But you make it sound really easy that the doors were always open. You would go knock on someone's door, they'd open it wide open for you. I mean, was that the case? I mean, I'm sure it wasn't that easy.
I
For a
think
fresh kid out of college trying to set this up.
I think there are two parts to it. I think people traditionally see the agency world as big brands with marketing managers who uh, are very like get solicited so much. I was not in that space at all. I was a fresh kid who was talking about websites and digital media at a time most people were not talking about it. And
Right.
usually the people I was talking to were running their businesses or were senior in their organizations who were not marketing people.
Right.
So as a result, they were willing to chat. They were willing to give this young kid some time. Often it come through warm introduction, so they didn't want to disappoint the introduction. It came through. So as a result, they were willing to sit down with me and have a chat. I was barely ever, I would say, at least at that stage of my career, maybe 5 or 10% of my conversations were with marketing folks. Usually, my meetings were
Okay.
with business folks, and business folks were more interested in listening to me uh, than, say, marketing folks would have now.
Right. So you basically started off talking to clients in Australia, right?
Right.
You spoke to clients in Sydney. When did you decide that you want to move out of Sydney and go, let's say, global and look at other markets? How did you take that decision?
A little bit of an accident, to be honest. So my original ambition in Langur was to build it as a products company rather than a services company. So we were building tools. You could convert your desktop site to mobile site in less than 2 minutes. You could build a website builder. This is in 2010, 11, when a lot of this
Right.
tech was either brand new or did not exist. So
Right.
when we wanted to build these tools, I decided to open an India office because obviously they have a reputation for having great tech talent, and I thought I'd go there, hire people, and build my products there. What ended up happening is because people in Australia knew I had an India office, they would often ask me, "Can we hire someone in India and save money?"
Right.
And after about 8 or 9 months, I initially I would resist that because I wanted that to focus on products and do a good job. But after a bit of sort of like people kept pushing, I was like, maybe I'm missing the bigger picture. Maybe that there is an opportunity here. So I accepted. I started accepting some work. There was a not-for-profit which didn't have big budgets, and they were like, if you could do it for lesser, it'd be great. So I said, sure, why not? Let's do it. And that then suddenly became a much bigger offering, a much more meaningful offering that people were wanting to pay for. So then I started getting a lot more work that involved selling in Australia, doing services in India. And then over a period of time, some of our customers took us to Singapore, some of our customers took us to Hong Kong. And then the last place we opened up was Dubai, but we also had an office in Melbourne. But Dubai was because our India business was going quite well, and I wanted to be closer to India.
So when you take advantage of the cost structure in India and then you price it based on services being priced in Sydney, you're basically taking a pricing arbitrage play, right? Isn't
Right.
that what it is?
Big part of it. I think you still have to service the customer locally, so you have to communicate with the audiences locally, which means you might need designers locally, you might need account managers locally. We had a few programmers locally, but we ended up at a model where 20% of our teams were spread and 80% of the team was in India. So
Got
you
it.
do a bulk of the heavy lifting in India.
And is that the right model globally? So, for example, in low-cost markets, the South Asian markets, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, like setting up the operations center there, be it for design, be it for paid media, and then set up account managers in different parts of the globe. Is that the right approach, do you think, for agencies going forward, especially in digital?
I think it's not a sustained advantage. I'll say that. I think there is only so much work you can do till competition catches up in that market, right? And I think now, if you look at the Australia-India arbitrage, there are at least 6 or 8 players doing the same thing. So you can't make that your only advantage. At some point, you really need to start defining which categories work better for you and what are you really good at. Um, Over the period of time, we became much stronger in B2B. We became much
Right.
stronger in healthcare. Uh, we started doing some decent work in marketing automation. So these became some of the niches that helped keep fueling the growth later, beyond the arbitrage.
So it's not just the low cost pricing. Anyone can play that. You have to find a sector or a segment or a product that you specialize in that gives you your right to win.
I
From
think that's
the
where the
sound of
future
it.
is. I mean, I was basically, your question was, can this last in the future? And that's right.
Yeah.
It lasted me until we sold, but I think moving forward, uh, specialization is where it's at. And I think you either do specialized services or you do high value tools, right? I don't think you can be a generalist anymore. Of course, because you're in Pakistan, maybe with fewer players, you can for a while, but over the period of time, if you can narrow down and become really good at a few verticals, then that will keep
Hmm.
fueling the growth.
Interesting. And you decided at some point, so you did this for, let's say, about what, 8, 9 years before you decided to
About nine
sell?
years. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess the selling decision about 8.5 years. That's right.
Why
Um,
did you decide to sell? What brought that decision along?
I think there were 2 or 3 things going on at the time. The first was we were close to the largest independent agency. We were close to being the largest independent agency in India, if not the largest. And uh, we were already attracting conversations with people. What we also discovered was to win the really big customers, they want us to have very strong balance sheets.
Right.
And I think it was either partnering with someone bigger or taking like all figuring out a way to grow ourselves and having the banking relationships to make that happen. I think it would have been a much lower path if we had done the latter. The last piece was I was at a point in my life where I was wondering whether this is what I want to continue to do for a very long time. And I think having done it for 8.5 years, I was ready to move on as well. So some of those decisions led me to deciding to find a specialist who can help us sell, and we went through a process which led us to selling to Havas last year.
So you went to Havas. Havas is a big has a big global footprint, and now you are a big part of Havas in India, right? I believe
Right,
you're
exactly.
majority of their revenue in India.
We are a substantial part of the EBITDA. I think Havas has committed to have a substantial footprint in India. They have actually been acquiring a few players in the market. They've also recently launched Havas CX, and part of that story is Langur being a strong component of that in India. Um, so, so yeah, I think they are ambitious. They want India to be a big part of their future, and so part of that story was bringing us on board.
Got it. When you're thinking of, sort of finding a partner or selling the business, I mean, you've been through the process, and now having been through it, what are some of the more important things to consider, as someone wants to, let's say, bring on a partner, strengthen their balance sheet, or even just outright sell the whole thing? What are some of the
Um,
key things that you wish you had considered that you may not have, or you are glad you considered that you did?
I think first of all, I think you need to think about how M&A works in your industry. So in the
Right.
digital world, it's a very established exercise, and there are certain structures, formulas, advisors that operate in a certain way. And in certain markets, you will always see a volume of mergers and acquisitions take place.
Right.
So if you're in a different industry, then you need to think about what's happening in that industry, what size matters. For example, in the digital agency world, most acquisitions will not occur till you are at least $3 million in revenue, because it's not meaningful for the head offices, given the sizes they are in. They are that they want to consider something smaller.
And when you say
Similarly,
$3 million in revenue, you're including the media spend, or that's aside?
I think it depends on agency to agency, but let's say that that's a meaningful number, right? I think most agencies will look for gross profit of $3 million or gross margin of $3 million, right? Secondly, I think you want to think about um, what are the who are the primary advisors or players who are driving a lot of the M&A in that space, right? And I think every country and every sector has a few who know the M&A in that space very well. So you want to find those people, talk to your contacts who might be in the know to bring them close to you, because they are
Right.
the ones with relationships with existing houses that can make that happen. The last piece is you really need strong advisors and lawyers to negotiate for you. I think
So you should
especially
negotiate yourself.
110% not, yeah. I think because you have no idea what a lot of these terms are, and they're usually working on boilerplate templates. So they've been through this exercise 20 times. They have the experience and the advantage over you in terms of understanding what is likely to go wrong, and they will protect their end of it. I think you
Right.
need to also have good advice at your end to ensure that you're not signing up to things that don't make sense. Especially agency exits are earn-out, so you're going to be tied to the organization for a while. So you want to make sure that there are methods and bridges in which you can solve any disputes that may come up over time.
Got it. You're out of the agency business now. Do you think there is a future for digital agencies with the sort of onset of AI in media, in paid media, and let's say creatives also? There's a lot of automation on the creative side, right? So if there's a lot of A/B testing happening on paid media, and if you can automate that entire process, then what value does an agency add? I mean, do they have a limited future going forward?
I mean, I think generally, I do wonder whether there is a play. Let's look at the top six agencies that exist. They are all financial companies in the business of advertising. So
What do you mean by that?
so they are effectively, let's call them banks for the lack of a better word, who are looking for a return on their capital. And then the way they do it is by either cycling money through paid media and making money over time, or through having people who can deliver value and generating a margin on that. They continue to grow by acquiring other agencies. So they have a certain model that operates that gives them a return on their capital, which gives them either an increase in share price or dividends or compensation if you're an executive. So my point is, the players who dominate the space look at the world from a very different lens to an independent agency. Um, the second part I will mention is Facebook and Google at the moment are taking anywhere between 65% to 85% of all media money.
Digital. Yep.
Um, of all, like, I mean, it would be at least upwards of 30 to 40% of all media money, full stop, right?
Right.
Uh, and when that kind of volume is going through these two platforms, you really need to think about where is your value being added.
Right.
And if you're not contributing meaningfully in that ecosystem, then that's a problem. The last comment I'll make is there are like ultimately what have agencies done? They've helped organizations reach consumers. Where are the consumers going? What is their behavior? What are they doing that you can add value to help to the organization to help reach those consumers? Is it through gaming? Is it through getting endorsements through influencers? Is it um, a range of new opportunities where consumers are spending time? How can you add value? So I think in my mind, being like considering that and becoming a specialist to at least get to a certain size, then you can think about other areas. It's going to be crucial for agencies to do well moving forward.
So the question is then, how is an agency adding value? That will determine its future. And secondly, to your point, is how is an agency assisting a brand finding audiences, right? Basically,
Sure.
audiences that are relevant.
Sure.
So my question then is, you mentioned, let's say Google and Facebook taking about 70-80% of the ad revenue, right? At least at a minimum 30-40%.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's globally it's applicable. It's the same here in our market in Pakistan as well. And my question then is, does this mean that there is an opportunity for influencers who have captive audiences, 10, 20, 40, 100,000 and above, on various platforms? Are we better off as brands or agencies paying the influencer directly and bypassing the platform? Because then you're basically targeting the influencer's audience. And if you're reaching audiences, and that's cheaper from a CPM basis because you're reaching the right people. You're not just hitting it, sort of wide and hoping you get it right.
Faizan, the main risk I think about when I think about influencers is who owns the data of the customers being reached, right? And that ultimately is Facebook and Google, and that's why they're commanding the money there. So the ultimate thing you can do as an agency or as a digital player is find ways to own the customer. So if you can meaningfully reach 200,000, 500,000, 1,000,000 people with really specialized demographic information, and you can actually translate that into revenue for the brand, then you will win. Like, you have no choice but to win. Now, if we go deeper in terms of how do you reach those people, influence is certainly one route. I do worry about sometimes that the freedom for agencies to use influencers, say on places like Facebook or Instagram or even YouTube, which is Google known, that exists right now, may not always exist. One of these platforms may want to make a platform where they pay these people directly for endorsing certain brands, in which case agencies will not have a role to play.
Right.
I don't know if they will do that, and they will, like, cutting out the ecosystem would be very risky for them. But I mean, these companies, they sometimes do not really care about agencies in the way they support them. So that can be a challenge, and as a result, you can't depend on them completely. I think if you can find out ways of using multi-channel approaches to reach specific audiences, and especially own the audiences, then nothing like it.
How do you own the audience? As an agency, what would be some of the ways you as the agency own the audience?
I'll give you two examples without quoting names because I haven't taken their permission to use this. But there is a distributor of a certain category in Australia, which, let's say food, because it's easier to then explain. They distribute food in Australia. And Langur helped this customer build a platform where the platform distributed recipes, tips in the kitchen, etc., etc. Over a period of time, this distributor actually built a database of hundreds of thousands of Australians and built a relationship directly with them by providing them meaningful content and experiences on a weekly basis.
Okay.
And as a distributor, that drove up the consumption of their products with these customers. And because they own the customer directly, although they do use social media channels and so on, they are not at the behest of these platforms.
Because they have direct data.
And they invested in collecting that information over time. So now they have direct one-on-one relationship with these customers.
Got it.
Another example is an agency. It's not quite an agency, but a company on which board I sit here in Dubai. They run a bunch of events where people participating in these events have to sign up, and usually they provide their details. And over the period of time, they've collected hundreds of thousands of participants in these events, but they can target them selectively for brands who want to engage. And as a result, this company is able to charge a premium to reach these people. So these are two examples where they've invested in first party data. So
And how long do you think it takes, sort of for a brand? How long would a brand need to invest in, sort of building the platform and acquiring first party data?
Yeah.
How much time do you think it takes to get to a level where you can say, okay, I have a meaningful amount of data that now reduces my reliance on these social networks?
Correct. So I think first part you have to consider is what is their appetite and what is the value they're adding, right? So as a
Right.
brand, I want to make sure that the consumers are happy receiving information from me, building a relationship with me, that I'm giving them something that adds value in their life, right?
Right.
So that's the first. So until you answer that question, scaling it up too fast doesn't make sense. Because if you have 5% open rates or people aren't subscribing to the newsletter or
Right.
they're not coming to your website anymore, then that's useless. You've already lost them.
Correct.
So I think early stage, you want to make sure that the value being added is meaningful. Once you've done that and you're reasonably confident that here is a sticky group of audience and there are things working, then you can build advertising models where you spend money on places like Facebook or Google or YouTube as relevant, physical
Right.
events, if that makes sense, to then drive engagement on your platform. And there you can then do a media model which sort of acquires the customer with the platform, and then you sort of build a relationship over time, either through marketing automation, personalization, whatever makes sense, to ensure that that relationship means that the customer starts becoming more loyal to the brand.
Got it. Interesting. So it's about acquiring first party customer data. And as long as you have that, I think you are in a position of strength. And you went through all of this. You did this for 9 years. You then sold the business to Havas. And then you decided, you know what, I'm done with digital and marketing and I'm going to switch gears completely. And now you've gotten into energy. Tell me a little bit about how that happened. I mean, how did you switch from a completely different field to energy?
I think something about entrepreneurship, and maybe it's about also conditioning. When you're growing up, you're always thinking about solving problems. And over the period of time, like I've been involved with a lot of organizations. I've started a diplomatic dialogue between Australia and India. I've done a lot of large not-for-profit boards and so on and so forth. So I haven't really thought about the field I'm in. I just like, as long as it's a good problem to solve, I'll go for it. Part of when I was going through the exit process and negotiating with Havas, a friend of mine here in Dubai who had run a large oil rigs business had exited that and was thinking about how we can use tokenization or securitization in the carbon trading space. Anyway, it's a little bit of a long shot to what we do now, which is we get customers to invest in solar, we get investors to invest in solar, and we get customers to save money by installing solar. So we basically find customers where we will install solar on their rooftop. We will sign something called a power purchase agreement, where we sell power to them from solar at a fixed price for the next 7 to 20 years. And that what they pay there is normally less than what they're paying the electricity board. And that return is usually 15% plus for the investors who fund the solar power. And for the investors who fund it, we are the aggregator. So we will manage the solar power plants for them on their behalf. And we get a percentage of the revenue to manage it on their behalf.
So that means people installing it on their rooftops, they don't have to pay for it. And investors paying for it. Right. People installing it in their houses are getting electricity cheaper than they would, let's say, through the direct transmission lines.
Right.
And the investor kind of gets a rate of return on their installation.
That's right. That's the design of what we're doing. And at the moment, we only do commercial and industrial, primarily because residential means it's a lot of effort acquiring customers, collecting money, etc. Whereas with commercial and industrial customers, often we can do very large plants with one customer. So we're primarily focused on larger plants at the moment. We're still only a year old. As we grow, we may consider residential later.
So it sounds like a fairly straightforward idea, very easy to replicate globally.
Yeah, well, I think for now, where we want to focus on is the developing world. So we're active in India, Middle East, and East Africa. These are markets where it's harder for companies to receive capital for renewable energy, but also by offering the deals we do, there's a really strong
Right.
incentive for people to save money and install solar.
Right.
And we don't have much competition in these parts of the world in the category we are in.
Right.
So as a result, where sometimes customers will call us because they're a large listed company and they will ask us to give them 3 quotes because they
Mm-hmm.
cannot find one themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll basically help them find receive quotes and then we win
Makes
deals. So that's
sense.
the model. Yeah.
So you talked about you mentioned this line, finding a problem to solve. You're linking that to entrepreneurship. I mean, what do you think are, let's say, some of the key things to keep in mind? You've now embarked on two entrepreneurial journeys. One was successful in that you had an exit with a big global player. This one you've just embarked upon. What are some of the things to keep in mind if, let's say, there's someone out there watching, thinking, you know what, I want to embark on my entrepreneurial journey. What is it that I need to keep in mind, regardless of what problem I'm trying to solve?
I think I'm the thing that worries me about venture capital headlines when someone raises 10 crores or 50 crores or whatever is it hides the fact that the company in question is usually, not always, but usually is delivering value to someone and generating revenue. And unfortunately, a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs do not understand that unless they generate revenue, being able to find capital to scale is not really a viable option. So what I'm getting to is, in my mind, the way to know whether what you have makes sense or not is if someone is paying you money to have it. I think that's the most straightforward way to know whether the problem you're solving has a financial value to it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there are opportunities. I mean, Facebook is the best known example of how they had no revenue. They grew on number of signups and the amount of time people were spending on the platform, and as a result, people were willing to fund it. And then they figured out advertising later. Google had the same
Mm-hmm.
model. So yes, I mean, if you're going to come through with a once in a lifetime opportunity like that on a amount of time spent, great. But that's not normally the case. Normally, a lot of these businesses are generating revenue before they're uh, raising the kind of rounds they are. So my biggest
Mm-hmm.
sort of tip is, if you're thinking about entrepreneurship, solve a problem where there is someone willing to pay you to solve that problem. And if you can replicate that a few times, then maybe you have a business.
And what about the challenges that come across the way? What was the greatest challenge you experienced so far in the, let's say, 10, 12 years you've been doing this entrepreneurship gig?
Um, There are few. I think there's not one. I think overall you have to adapt to understand everything. So you have to think about finance, and you have to think about hiring, and you have to think about uh, capital raising, customer acquisition, like all of these. See, the thing about entrepreneurship is ultimately your ass is on the line no matter what, and you
Right.
are the one accountable for every aspect. So you have to get to a place where you learn as fast as possible. And the best way to learn a lot of this, unfortunately, is going through experiences which suck and train you on, right? So a lot of these challenges hopefully are making you better for it, right? Like I've had really difficult customers, I've had serious cash flow issues, I've had capital raising challenges, people leaving when they are really performers, or people staying when they're really bad performers. So like
Mm-hmm.
you have a ton of these challenges, and you grow from it. And I mean, one of the things I'm going through right now with a new business is how to make sure that some of the mistakes I may have made in the past, how do I make sure I don't repeat them? And that is now sort of my new approach. Is if I see something that is a problem based on my experience, I will. I'm trying very hard to make sure that I don't repeat the same mistakes that I did in the past.
So 10 years from now, where do you see yourself? You've done the marketing and advertising agency thing, you're doing the energy gig. Is there a new gig you'll be out, or would you have hung your hat and said, I'm ready to retire?
I don't think I'll ever retire. That's for sure. I think I'll always be solving problems. I hope. Um, I used to think a lot more about legacy, Faizan, but I think a lot less about it now. And a big part of that has been going through a journey or an exercise and thinking about, am I happy about what I'm doing, right? And I think I'm usually attracted to things that have me excited. So I don't know if you come across the concept of ikigai, which is Japanese word for find what you
Hmm.
love. Can it pay you money? Does it
Exactly.
solve a problem in the world? And I'm trying as hard as possible to do those things. It's not easy for everyone. It doesn't come naturally, but a big part of my shift from a digital world to the renewable world was about that.
Hmm.
And I want to do more of the same. So I hope that I keep finding opportunities like that to add value to. Right? I think a lot less now about. Actually do not even think about the world remembering me. What I think about every day is waking up. Am I happy? And am I solving a problem that adds value?
Right. That's a good thing to think about because it constantly keeps you alert for when you are not happy, and then you're focused on eliminating that from your life to
Right.
continue that state of happiness. And I think that that is what ultimately leaves the legacy without you actually thinking about leaving a legacy. And if you're
And
happy about what you're doing, you do a good job at it.
I mean, if getting a little bit more philosophical, but humans have been around for maybe 10,000 years. I think in the greater span of time, we are completely insignificant. So ultimately, we
Right.
are here. How do we make the most of it, and can we move the
Right.
human race forward? Right, like that's all we can do, and play our part and move forward.
That's a very good point, and I think I'm going to close on that. I'm going to think about my ikigai, and I think everyone watching should think about theirs as well. And what is it that truly makes them happy on a day-to-day basis? These are great insights, Ruchir. Thank you for taking the time today and sharing your journey with us. And thank you all for tuning in to episode 20 of DigiTales. And stay tuned for the next one. Thanks, Ruchir.
Thanks, Faizan. Thanks so much.
See you. Bye bye.
Mhm.